What's up, everyone? Back with another comic book review. Today I'm going to take a look at Green Lantern and the Sentinel, Heart of Darkness number 2. Now, this is kind of a review of the entire 3-issue miniseries, but I wanted to focus on number 2 just because it's halfway through the story. This is a really cool miniseries. It came out in 1998, and it stars the Sentinel version of the Alan Scott character. So Alan Scott was the first Green Lantern, as many of you know, and he went through a couple iterations once Hal Jordan and the modern Green Lantern mythos was kind of set up. During the 90s, he went by the title Sentinel, and basically it boiled down to his powers were kind of related to the Green Lantern. It's kind of complicated, but basically there was a Green Lantern on Earth at one point. It was like this monster guy who wore a red and green outfit similar to Alan Scott's. His power got like combined into the Starheart, which was like a meteor that Alan then made a ring. I don't know. It all got really complicated, but the gist is this is Kyle Rayner and Alan Scott teaming up to save Jade. Now, Jade is Alan Scott's daughter. She also has Green Lantern-esque powers, along with some plant-based powers, and she was Kyle Rayner's girlfriend at this time. And the plot of this series revolves around Jade has gone missing, and they're not sure what happened. And Jade also has a brother named Todd Rice, also known as the character called Obsidian, who has his villainous moments. He's kind of portrayed as a anti-hero where he's a good guy sometimes and a bad guy other times. So let's jump in at issue 2 just so I can kind of show you guys how cool it is. The artist on this one is Paul Pelletier? Pelletier? I'm not sure how to pronounce it. He doesn't sound super familiar, but he does a really good job in this issue, except for one slightly weird 2-page spread. So it starts off, and they're at an insane asylum to visit a guy named Brainwave. Brainwave is from Infinity Inc. So Obsidian and Jade, the children of Alan Scott, first appeared in connection with the Infinity Inc. It was a superhero group. It was basically the JSA's version of the Teen Titans. So the Justice League had the Teen Titans, where you had, Wonder Woman's sidekick and the Flash's sidekick and Batman's sidekick and Green Arrow's sidekick. The JSA had Infinity Inc., and it was the children of all the heroes. So you had the children of Green Lantern, Alan Scott, the children of Carter Hall and Shayera Hall, which was Hector Hall, and this weird bird guy named Northwind. But it was all very cool, so you kind of got to see the teenage versions, the next generation, so to speak. So they're going to find Brainwave because Brainwave had mental powers, and he kind of snapped. At this point in time, he had completely snapped, and he was just foaming at the mouth. They think he's responsible for taking Jade away. Obsidian, being as unhinged as he is, overreacts a little. But, I love 90s comic books. I know it gets a lot of hate, but there's just something about, they were dark and gritty, but they still always wore their costumes. I feel like this just doesn't really happen now. If this was a modern comic book, they'd all probably be wearing normal clothes, and he'd be half turning into his shadow form. So he flips out on Brainwave because he's like, you're a dangerous person. Also, that Alan Scott costume is really cool. They actually ruin it at the end of this miniseries, and I'll get to why later, but they take away his emblem, and he just has this red chest. But I love this Alan Scott costume. I wish it had some of the purple flares that he had in the past, just to maintain the color scheme, but I really like the way this one looks. So he's Sentinel at this time. That's his nom de guerre, so to speak. And he gets together. Kyle and Alan are able to kind of pull Obsidian off, and this kind of drives home the overlying theme behind the arc. Todd goes into detail, or Obsidian goes into detail here. Me explain myself, maybe you're the one who should be explaining why you're more concerned with some psychopath's welfare than you are with your daughter. Aren't you supposed to be her father? That's kind of the overlying theme of this entire 3-issue miniseries, is Alan Scott's shortcomings as a father in a couple ways. So it's not actually Mindwave. He doesn't have anything to do with it. He didn't take Jade. So they're going to figure out why. Kyle, because he's dating Jade, doesn't have a terrific relationship with Todd. Todd is a little obsessive. He's a little weird. He's completely unhinged. But he tries to relate to him any chance he can. And he even says here, in classic, Kyle was always kind of the awkward one. I think that's why I kind of related to him. You and I don't know, it just struck me as kind of similar. A true father doesn't advantage a child. So the reason he's saying this kind of similar is Kyle Rayner His father had left shortly after he was born. He had a father, it's kind of a complicated story, but basically I I believe he was in the Secret Service. It's been, or not the Secret Service, the whatever the FBI put you under, witness protection. It's been a while since I read the story, so I can't really remember the details. He was like a government agent or something. I know he's Hispanic. That's the thing I remember the most. So he's saying like, hey, my dad left me too. Alan didn't get to spend time with Jade or Obsidian growing up, so we can relate some way. But Obsidian just like freaks out on him. He's like, no, I don't want any part of this. And it just escalates from there. And I use these little helpful things to help me remember what I want to, certain pages I want to talk about. So it escalates from there and it breaks out into a fight. This is another thing I really like about Kyle Rayner. I think Kyle Rayner has some of the best Green Lantern constructs. Like, it's not even green. Like, the colorist isn't even trying to hide at this point. This is just Kyle making an angel to attack. You have here them both making shields, and you can see Alan's is kind of filled with fire, and Kyle's is more metallic looking. Also, that Jade cover. I can't get over that Jade cover. I feel like they wouldn't even sell that in the stands. It'd be like behind the counter, and you had to ask for it like a weirdo. So yeah, just great constructs from Kyle. A majority of this issue, I wouldn't say majority, probably about a quarter of this issue is the fight with Obsidian, and it's really cool because you have two light-based superheroes against one shadow-based superhero, which is always kind of a fun combination. So then Todd pulls them into his like shadow world. It's weird. All of these characters, these like Raven does this, and Obsidian does it, and Cloak does it. Whenever they have shadow powers, they always have this like realm that they can take people in. I never know if it's like, is it the same one? Is it just like, does it exist within their cape? What are the details there? Do they have control over it? Is a portal to another dimension? That's never really clarified. Obsidian goes on to be a bad guy, a really, really big bad guy in Jeff Johns' JSA series, and he does a whole lot with like bringing in his Shadowverse thing. But yeah, this is a pretty good double page spread. One of the things I didn't like though is I can't look away from Kyle's hair. This is something that bothers me with 90s comic books in general, because the hairstyle was kind of that like high and tight but really long on the top, so it always creates kind of this weird silhouette. He's got like so yeah, that just kind of bothered me. But I like what they did with Obsidian's world and how it actually looks like this. It looks very similar to this in the JSA series later on, so that comes way later. Actually, it might have been no, it comes way later. So then it's revealed that the bad guy is actually the Starheart. The Starheart is Alan Scott's power source. So the reason he doesn't have the symbol after this is done is because he thinks the star is too closely related to Starheart, and he decides to go without a symbol. I actually show you over here in the third issue. Yeah. Which, yeah, that just doesn't look good. I see what they're trying to do with him and Obsidian, but I do not think it works. So yeah, you discover that the Starheart is behind it all. And he kind of goes into explanation of basically what happened. The origin for the Starheart has changed over time. At this point in time, it was like the combination of all chaotic magic. So he's chaos, and he wants to bring chaos. I mean, it works. It works fine. It's a nice little... But the Starheart views Alan Scott as kind of his father. So it goes back to the theme of like, Alan Scott as a father. The kids he neglected. Starheart feels neglected now because he's moved on. That one's a little strange just because the Starheart is like this all-powerful entity, but he still kind of sees Alan Scott as his father. But it just really harps on Alan, all of his shortcomings, everything he did as a superhero and as a person, and what he could have done better. And that's what I really like about this, because I enjoy Kyle Rayner because he's filled with flaws, but Alan Scott's one of those characters who he came about in the Golden Age when superheroes really didn't have flaws, so they kind of had to go back and give him some. So they did that with Infinity Inc. by having these two children that he never even knew about. So it's still not really his fault, but this miniseries drives home that like there could have been aspects of him that could have tried better. The relationship with Jade and Obsidian's mom was not ideal. She was a supervillain, and she left before Alan Scott, but he should have probably gone after her. Those are kind of the issues he grapples with. So it's nice to see a Golden Age character being given these flaws, being given these things that he has to overcome, so we relate to him more. And that's what people talk about now when they say, like, the modern invention of characters, they don't take the time to set that up. They don't take the time to set up... I mean, this is a powerful guy. He's done a lot of... And at this point in his life, he has a lot of great deeds under his belt. But if he was introduced, like, you could have introduced him today like this and just had these same shortcomings, had these same problems, it would have made him a more three-dimensional character. Because yes, he is all powerful in a purely like physical out there kind of mentality, but emotionally he's very weak. He's very crippled because of his decisions and everything he kind of has to do. And that's one of the things I love about superheroes. I love, a good superhero, you draw the parallels between the real world and the fictional world. They're telling the same types of stories they tell with normal people, but at an elevated level. You get to experience things, the same things that you're going through in your life, but with characters that kind of mask it. That's why there's like a level of subtlety. This never turns into, I mentioned in my Guy Gardner video for Hal Jordan in the Green Lantern Corps 16, that sometimes they harp on the father issues too much. I think that's really prevalent now in media in general. So you have to do it with a little bit of subtlety for it to work. That particular issue was a little heavy with it, but it worked for the storytelling, and Venditti did a really good job of telling that story. Here, it's a lot lighter of a touch, but I think it comes across more because it's the overlying theme. The villain, the main plot drive at the beginning of the story, it's all kind of tied into that same element, and that is Alan Scott. So at the end of the second issue, he tries to fix everything by sacrificing himself. The Starheart takes away his power, which ages him up to the age he should be, and he falls flat. So, like I said in another video, I don't want to get into it too much because I think it's worth having an entire video for, but the Alan Scott character is incredibly significant for me. More so than Kyle Rayner or any of the other Green Lanterns, because of the relationship I had with the creator of Alan Scott, Mario Nodell, my earliest days of comic collecting, and some appearances at a convention. So I love reading old Alan Scott stories because it reminds me of talking to his founder, for his creator, Marty Nodell, and his excitement and his passion, and how excited he was to see me as a kid being someone who was into superheroes and had a trajectory like that. So yeah, definitely a really fun miniseries. Really easy to find. I mean, these, back in the 98, they had fairly high print runs. It's only 3 issues. It also features Kyle Rayner, who's my favorite Green Lantern. After I give that big soliloquy about Alan Scott, but yes, Kyle Rayner is still my favorite character-wise. Alan Scott I just have a more personal relationship with. So yeah, it's written by Ron Mars, and I know Ron Mars is not the best person on social media. He says a lot of just mean, just not nice things. I can't even describe how like frustrated I get whenever I read classic Ron Mars writing and then have to remember what kind of human he is now. But yeah, go out, find it. It's definitely a good miniseries, especially if you're interested in the Alan Scott version of the character, if you're interested in Jade and Obsidian, that whole kind of messed up family tree. If you're just a Kyle Rayner fan, it's still a pretty good story, but you're not going to get as much out of it. But if you're a Kyle Rayner fan, you probably like Jade too, and she plays a big part in this. So yeah, let me know down in the comments if you think reviewing old comic books is worth it. If you've ever seen a review anywhere on YouTube of an old comic book and you're like, I'm going to go track that down, and did. I want to hear about those stories because I like talking about old books, but it doesn't seem to be super popular. But I mean, who knows? I certainly don't. So let me know down in the comments what you thought about this video, if you're going to look for this mini-series, and any books you have or stories you have about creators and their characters and how it kind of formed your early days of comic collecting. And until next time, go read a comic. Any comic.